Christian Parenting.
Welcome to part 3 of this little mini series that we're just talking about homeschooling specific children and their personalities. Now, there are a lot out there. I just kind of picked out the main ones that I'm the most familiar with. But if you have some other questions about different types of personalities, send me a quick email. Let me know. I'd love to maybe encourage you specific in that, maybe on the podcast or just maybe back through an email. But you hear the phrase compliant child. And of course, we all want one of those. We want, 3 of those, 5 of those, 10 of those. That would make life so much easier, right? But each personality presents itself with challenges. There are challenges to your personality. There are challenges to your husband's personality. The two of you together it becomes very obvious the challenges in his personality from your view and your personality challenges from his view. But one of those, when it comes to the compliant child, the challenge is in teaching them and them knowing how to create boundaries. They will very easily say yes, whether they're 2 years old, 12 years old, or 22 years old. But for their safety, for their physical, mental, and emotional safety, they need to know how to create and maintain boundaries and how to use their personality for the good of those around them and for God's glory. And that's what we're going to tackle in today's episode. Welcome to Little by Little Homeschool Podcast. I am your host, Leigh. I'm glad that you're here. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the 3rd episode in just a 3-episode little mini series about specific personalities. If you did not listen to the other 2, just go ahead, head back, click back at 2 more, and you can find those different episodes. But I'm glad that you are here, and we know that homeschooling is not just the academics. There is so much more involved, and there should be so much more involved, because at the end of the day, they aren't going to remember all the dates from that war and all the generals that fought in that war, but they will remember the big, broader picture. And that is what homeschool teaches them. They will remember the time with you. They will have those relationships. They will have that foundation of biblical truth, and that is the goal. So let's get into today's episode and specifically talk about the compliant child and encouraging them in creating boundaries. Let's start off and talk about some of the signs of a compliant child. This child, again, whether they are 2, 12, 22, and you will recognize this from a young age. So if you have a child that is 15 and you're like, are they compliant? You know already if they are or they are not. As a compliant child their default is going to be yes. It might be followed with a yes, ma'am, yes, sir. They will just say yes to things. They're often sensitive to what others need and what others are feeling. They're observant and they take in that observation, and then they grow in sensitivity and they try to meet the needs of those around them. They are also just very compassionate. Again, they will recognize things that maybe that strong-willed child that we talked about in the last episode just might not recognize, but they want to help others, and they are often accompanied these feelings of being sensitive and being observant and being compassionate. It also typically follows with some type of action. For example, they notice that you, the mom, that you're sitting on the couch, you look weary, downtrodden. Maybe they know that there was just a power struggle between you and their strong-willed sibling. And they might say, you know what? Mom actually really likes a cup of tea right now. Or, I think I know where that secret stash of chocolate is that mom has. Or, you know what? Mom I think she just needs someone's hand to hold right now. And they will take action on that. But they also are just very readily willing to say yes. They could be just a couple years old and you could say, go and get that for me, or go clean up those toys. Yes. And they'll go and do it. Maybe they're young and they don't quite get the yes quite out, but they just go and do that. They want to be helpful. Well, they want to hear you sing their praises. They want to hear you say, thank you so much, or that was a really good job. And that's important for compliant children to hear. So don't think that those are not important, that they are always just doing it sometimes for the self-gratification, just inward. But they also really do thrive on that thank you very much and being recognizing just the little things that the compliant child does. But there can be a secret rebellion underneath, and we'll get into that in a little bit. There are pros and cons when it comes to the compliant child. The pros are that people often love these children. They are trustworthy. They are the ones that can maybe the teacher can leave the Sunday school classroom and leave them in charge for a couple of minutes. I was totally that as a young child. I was the teacher's pet. I went to public school. I was always the teacher's pet and didn't always win me awards with the other students. But people in general tend to love the compliant children because it's so much easier, right? With a compliant child, with someone who's going to say, yes, I'll do that math worksheet, as opposed to the child's going to say, no, you're going to have to make me do that math worksheet. Another pro to a compliant child is that they are easily accepted into different groups, no matter what the group is, whether it is other children or a mixed group of ages or adults. Now, the cons, which we're going to focus in a bit today, is that they can be easily taken advantage of. And that is my focus today, that latter part, that the fact that they can be easily taken advantage of. And we want to teach them how to create boundaries so that they are not taken advantage of. First, I do want to say that a compliant child can fool you into thinking that they believe and trust the gospel and they love Jesus and they can very easily recite all the words. They can be in Bible quizzing and be the number one kid in Bible quizzing. They could have all of their, for a girl, American Heritage Girls, all of those badges and all of those awards and maybe Trail Life or whatever organization. They could talk the talk and walk the walk. But their heart has not been shaped. They are just going through the motions. Do not let their compliance or just simply their attendance or their willingness to attend all of the different Bible camps and to go to church every Sunday without ever saying anything like, oh, I don't really want to go, or, oh, I got to get dressed into nice clothing to go to church. They might just very easily go along with everything, but don't assume that that's their heart posture. And so watch and observe as a parent. And just like I talked about in the last episode and the one before, that relationship is really important. We don't always know what's going on in a child's heart and mind. And I remember specifically just my mind being blown with, we'll say my firstborn, because obviously it's the first child that I have raised. And when they're little, everything, there is no inner dialogue going on in their head. There's nothing going on inside their head. It's basically what I think is coming right out. And you know all of their thoughts and their feelings about everything, right? That can be draining for us because we're like, can we have a moment of silence here? There's just lots of talking and multiple kids and there's just a lot of things. And then they start to think more in their head. And as they get older, just more and more is in their head. Some kids are going to be natural just gabbers. They're going to still tell you a lot that's going on. But I just remember being like, oh, I don't know everything that's going on in their head anymore. And so we need to be observant. We need to have conversations. We need to take time one-on-one with each child. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant. It can simply be maybe just sitting in the backyard with that child while everybody else is inside. Obviously, everybody else inside is okay. Or dad's home watching everybody if they're younger. But these compliant children can easily just go through the motions and fool you. And it's not always in a conniving kind of way. They've just been so much just saying yes that they didn't realize that there really is a relationship that needs to be cultivated and sanctification and a relationship with Jesus that needs to be grown in them. So watch out for that. That's the part of that rebellion and then they can become rebellious afterwards, after they get out of your home or just a little bit older and they have more freedom. But the number one fear of a parent with a compliant child is that this child will be taken advantage of. Those strong-willed children that we talked about earlier this week, it can be a bit harder. Doesn't mean that they can't be taken advantage of, but they are going to let you know what they think about things. And they might not go along with things. But a compliant child often wants to make those around them happy. And therefore, this can be a bit of a challenge when it comes to this because we have to protect them. And one of those ways of protecting them, especially as they get older, is allowing them to see your own boundaries. The fact that mom doesn't say yes to everybody. And a very big thing, especially if you recognize that you have a young child that is very compliant, will go along with things. You have to talk to them about inappropriate behavior from other people. There are many resources. There are books out there. There are speakers. There are all kinds of things out there. I'm not going to get into the details here. I'm not an expert on this, but I want you to make sure that you are having conversations with your children about what is appropriate with other people and with other children as well, because other children can take advantage physically, mentally, emotionally of other children. And so I want you to make sure that you are having conversations, you're reading books, you're using resources so that this child knows that they can say no to this adult that's possibly starting to try to groom them or skipping all the grooming and is just inappropriately touching them. They have to know that that is not okay. And a compliant child will very easily go along with things because there is an authority figure and they want to make that person happy. And that is not the goal of life, is to make everybody happy. We're not going to make everybody happy. And they need to say no, and you need to teach them how to say no and how to get out of the situation. So we don't want them to be taken advantage of, and that is a great fear that parents have of compliant children, especially when they're younger. As they get older, it might not necessarily be them being taken advantage of in some type of physical way, but some type of emotional or mental way. And so it kind of can shift a little bit as they get older. But please don't assume that your young child or elementary school student knows how to say no and knows how to say no in a firm way and knows how to get out of a situation if you don't teach them that. So teach them with directions and words that are appropriate to their age. And sometimes with compliant children, they are more sensitive and they don't maybe kind of understand as much. So you have to just kind of take things, whereas a strong-willed child, you can maybe flat out say it to them. A compliant child, we just need to be a little more sensitive to how we're saying it, because if you were to say the same thing that you would say to a strong-willed child, they might just take it as like, might hurt their feelings way even more. They just take it just as, it's just too harsh of words. So a compliant child, unfortunately, can be very easily influenced for good, influenced for bad. And so we need to teach them that it's okay to say no, and teach them how to say no in different situations. Again, going back to maybe an adult taking advantage of them or doing something inappropriate, that is a time that we say no firmly and loudly, and we get out of the situation. And then as they get older, we teach them how to say no graciously. Maybe an adult has asked them, I don't know, they volunteer at church and an adult has asked to, trade them times and for maybe kids' church or something like that. And it just isn't really necessarily going to work, or they don't really like to be in that specific classroom and teaching kids as a teen. Teach them how to say no graciously, but also teach them it's okay sometimes to be a little uncomfortable, maybe teaching that certain age of kids that we don't really feel comfortable. Maybe God's going to teach you something through that. But as they get older, teaching them how to say no to a lot of different situations, and watch out for them. Watch out for your compliant child as they continue to get older. Maybe we want to watch out for our children of all ages, but specifically that compliant child. Just kind of keep an eye and an ear out at all times. And often with those children, we can sense that something's just a little bit off, that maybe they are feeling a little uncomfortable, but just knowing them really well and just kind of having an ear to the ground and saying, this person is going to contact you. They asked me for this is a real life situation. They asked me for your number. And is it okay if I give them your number? Because I think they want to ask you about something to help out, volunteer, or whatever. It is okay to say no. And we can talk through how to graciously do that, but also just, I don't think we always have to dance around. I don't think compliant children have to be taught to obviously not to lie. And we don't always have to soften the blow for somebody. We can simply say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that. That's a kind way to do it. But it's teaching our compliant children to say no from a young age all the way up. And as they get older, we get to model and talk them through boundaries for different relationships. So these are made for friends. This would be relationships, maybe grandparents or aunts and uncles. This could be as they get older for bosses and coworkers. And, you don't need to give your phone number out to every coworker. And just because you work with them doesn't mean that you have to be friends with them. You can just simply work and work well together. You don't have to hang out with them outside of work. They don't need to be your new BFF. Maybe they are. Maybe it's a great fit, but we don't have to do those things. We can create those boundaries and just interact with that person at work. But as there's different relationships when it comes to dating, how do we create those boundaries to be able to protect ourselves? And just overall, the fact that they don't have to say yes to every request that somebody has. It is very nice of compliant children to want to please others and to be helpful. That's often what is at the root of it, is they want to be helpful. They want to be a blessing. And so they look at it as if, well, if I create some boundaries and I say no, then that isn't me being helpful. And as compliant children get older, I've just found that I say more and more that you don't have to solve everybody's problems. And if you're not available to do that, they'll find somebody else. Just like when I've asked somebody maybe to do something and they have said no, I didn't sit around and lament and grieve over the fact that somebody said no. I just said, okay, well, that person's not going to work out. Let me move on to the next person. It's okay. They will find somebody else. And that goes both ways. There's going to be times that the compliant child is going to be told no. And sometimes compliant children are very shocked. What do you mean? No, I thought we just all said yes to everything. And talking them through that and say, it just didn't work for them. Don't take offense. Don't take it personal. Go move on. Find someone else to fill that position. But the compliance can be a gift. I talked a little bit about the cons because that's kind of the bit of the focus, is helping them to create boundaries. And that can be something that is negative and hard and not natural for the compliant child. But this can be a gift. Show them that. Show them that their willingness to love others and to be helpful and to be kind and generous and compassionate, that is a good thing. And that God has given them that gift of wanting to be helpful to other people. There are some of us who that is not a natural bent. And so if God has given that to them as a natural bent, show them that it is a good thing and help them to channel it into good things while creating some boundaries and protecting them physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. But we also need to teach our children as they get older, the compliant ones, we need to teach them that in some areas of life that compliance isn't going to be the best solution. For example, your young boys, if you have a compliant boy, yes, ma'am, yes, and they just go along with things as they get older, someday they're going to be leading a family. And they're going to be told no at times. And how do you lead a family? And how do you not say yes to everything? If you are leading a family someday, you have a wife and you have children, and you say yes to every single request that somebody has of you, you're not going to be around your family. You're going to be busy, or you're going to get your family so busy and so overrun with so many things. So teaching them when they're young to create those boundaries. And that goes for young women too. That goes for our girls as well. But I just kind of want to specifically talk about that with boys, if you have a boy that is kind of leans towards being compliant. But this is a good gift. It is just a gift of compassion and mercy and understanding and sensitivity and a willingness and a wanting to help others. And when their heart is focused on the gospel, they want to use that to give God glory and to share their faith with others. And so it can be a really good thing. But it's also teaching them as parents. This is more than just the academics when we homeschool, is teaching them how to navigate through life with the natural bents and the way that God has created them, and seeing those things as gifts. And how can we do that in a way that protects them, mind, body, and spirit? Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoy Little by Little Homeschool Podcast, there is one way that you can really specifically bless the podcast, and that is to leave a podcast review. No matter what app you're on, I think you can probably leave a review. Apple and Spotify are a little bit different. Apple, you can leave just a general rating, which is the stars, and then a review, you write out maybe a sentence or so. And then Spotify, you could actually leave a comment on one specific episode. It could be this one, or it could be another one. I would greatly appreciate it. That way, this episode and this overall, the podcast, gets out to other homeschool moms or moms that are thinking about homeschool. Let's help to convert some of those that are on the fence, right? So I would love if you would leave a review. It would just bless me big. And thank you for listening to today's episode of Little by Little Homeschool.